Hi and welcome. I'm AnewZ and you are watching AnewZ. Here are the headlines. Donald Trump says Washington is closing in on a new trade deal with Beijing. Russia and Ukraine exchange more prisoners of war after another round of talks in Istanbul. A passenger plane carrying 48 people crashes in Russia's Far East. Thank you for tuning in. The United States is closing in on a new trade deal with China, according to President Donald Trump. Speaking at an AI event in Washington, Trump also said talks are underway with the European Union and warned that countries that do not make a deal will face tariffs ranging from 15 to 50%.
President Donald Trump confirmed that the US is in the process of completing its deal with China, calling recent agreements with the UK and other Asian countries very good deals for everybody. He made the comments at an artificial intelligence conference in Washington on Wednesday. But President Trump made it clear that other countries should brace for more tariffs.
We're in the process of completing our deal with China. Just made some incredible transactions, but we're going to have a very, very simple tariff for some of the countries. There's so many countries you can't negotiate deals with everyone, so we'll have a straight, simple tariff of anywhere between 15 and 50%. A couple of we have 15 because we haven't been getting along with those countries too well.
The president added that negotiations with the European Union were ongoing, but countries that stayed close to US goods will pay the price.
We've offered such a deal to the European Union, where we're in serious negotiations, and if they agree to open up the union to American businesses, then we will let them pay a lower tariff.
In Beijing, China responded with a familiar message, urging calm and consultation ahead of trade talks between the two countries set to resume next week in Stockholm.
China always advocates that all sides should tackle economic and trade disputes through equal dialogue and consultation.
Without a formal agreement, steep tariffs on both sides could snap back within weeks.
At the close of the one-day European Union-China summit, leaders held frank talks on trade tensions and pledged closer cooperation on climate. Our William Denslow brings more from Brussels.
Speaking at a press conference at the conclusion of this EU-China summit, Antonio Costa, the European Council president, said that it was really an opportunity during this one-day affair to have open and frank exchanges with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li. There are a number of issues that the two sides do not see eye to eye on, chiefly the issue of trade. There have been increased trade tensions over recent months between two entities that account for roughly a third of global trade. The message from the EU has been that they believe that this trade relationship has become increasingly unbalanced, even unsustainable. The EU estimates that the trade deficit has doubled in the past decade, and now the deficit when it comes to goods equates to roughly $350 billion. Also, a big area that was discussed, foreign policy. The EU says it has talked to Chinese counterparts, urging them to use their influence and their position at the UN Security Council to try and force Russia into a lasting negotiated ceasefire and peace with Ukraine. But there are certainly areas where the two do see eye to eye, and that was chiefly the issues of the environment. That was reflected in the fact that the two sides did sign a joint statement. The message from both sides: green is the colour of China-EU cooperation. They want to see the COP30 in Brazil later this year be a success. They want to ensure more things like access to green technology in the future. They pledged to work more closely on that issue at a bilateral level, as well as using their influence on the global stage. But of course, overshadowed with these talks were the differences between the two sides, chiefly that issue of trade. Was summed up by Antonio Costa, who said that this was a frank conversation, opportunity to have frank conversation. He says now, though, is incredibly important for the two sides to translate these conversations into meaningful actions going forward. William Denslow for AnewZ, Brussels.
Now for a closer look at the nuances of the EU-China summit and the Brussels-Beijing relations marked by trade imbalances, geopolitical friction, and human rights concerns, we go to our Anita Sharma.
Hello and welcome to This Day in Europe. A major diplomatic test played out in Beijing today. Top European leaders met with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Qiang for the 25th EU-China summit. Now, the meeting came at a very critical time amidst rising trade tensions, deep geopolitical rifts, and a strained global economy. This year's summit marks 50 years of diplomatic relations, but the event was far from celebratory, lasting just one day. Some suggest it was still packed with significance, but it remains to be seen what exactly comes from this summit. So let's get to it. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa came to Beijing with a very clear message. Europe wants a more balanced partnership and is no longer willing to tolerate what it calls unfair trade practices or strategic ambiguity. Von der Leyen said the EU's relationship with China is, quote, at an inflection point, and that real solutions are needed to rebalance trade and ensure fair competition. To give you an idea of numbers here, the EU's trade deficit with China hit a record 306 billion euros last year. And that has Brussels worried about Europe becoming perhaps dangerously dependent on Chinese overproduction in sectors like electric vehicles, solar panels, and critical raw materials. European officials argue that Chinese industrial overcapacity fueled by state subsidies is distorting global markets and threatening European jobs. Well, China certainly had something to say about that. But interestingly enough, for his part, Xi Jinping adopted a rather measured tone. In his opening remarks, Xi Jinping called the EU a, quote, strategic force in a multipolar world, but warned against what he described as protectionism and the tendency to build walls or break supply chains. He also described their relationship as being at a, quote, critical juncture and suggested that both sides must make the right strategic choices. Xi said he wants to see respect for each other, seeking common ground while shelving differences and building a more stable partnership. Beijing is especially concerned about Europe's recent anti-subsidy investigations targeting EVs and the tightening of controls on foreign investment. In response, as we previously reported on AnewZ, China launched its own probes into EU exports, including wine and brandy, essentially a trade standoff that now clouds what was once a booming economic relationship. Another flashpoint was the EU's demand for predictable access to rare earths, which are critical for Europe's green and defense industries. There is no doubt that China has clear dominance here with its tremendous global rare earth supply chains and recently introducing new export restrictions. All that has forced Brussels to push for guarantees on long-term licenses. Trade aside, Ukraine was and remains a huge issue, with both sides still deeply divided. Von der Leyen reiterated that China's continued economic support for Russia, particularly its dual-use exports, is undermining efforts to end the war. She told reporters after the closed-door talks that, quote, China must not enable Russia's war economy. Peace requires responsibility from all major powers. Chinese officials just waved off her criticism as groundless and instead urged Brussels to focus on, quote, pragmatic cooperation to avoid turning the summit into a geopolitical battleground. But Beijing also criticized the bloc's sanctions announced last Friday, which will impact two Chinese banks over claims they are facilitating trade with Russia. All this certainly made for a rather tense time. However, some progress was spotted, at least symbolically. Both sides committed to continued dialogue on climate change, with Beijing and Brussels pledging to work on a joint declaration ahead of COP30 in Brazil this November. The EU is pushing for firmer Chinese commitments on emissions, though details remain vague at this point.
U.S. President Donald Trump announced a sweeping new agreement with the European Union that will see Washington manufacture weapons and military equipment fully funded by Brussels, with a significant portion destined for Ukraine. Under the arrangement, the U.S. will produce weapons for the EU, which will then manage distribution. Trump confirmed that most of the systems are expected to be directed to Ukraine to support its ongoing defense efforts. He described the deal as a long overdue step that will benefit both U.S. defense contractors and Ukrainian forces.
We just made a deal with the European Union where they're going to pay the United States of America 100% of the cost of all military equipment. They're going to ship it to the European Union and then they'll distribute it, and much of it will go to Ukraine. It's been a long time since you've heard those words, because we're in for $350 billion, but now we send it to Europe and Europe pays. And
with the weapons deal with the EU done, the U.S. is still negotiating a trade deal with the bloc, with just over a week left until the August 1st deadline on whether tariffs between Brussels and Washington could be avoided, and what if not? We're talking with political scientist Daniela Mello, coming to us from London. Welcome, thank you so much for being with us. Now, according to some reports, the sides are closing in on a deal. Do you believe the momentum from the weapons agreement might push the trade negotiations over the finish line?
Hello, it's a pleasure to be with you here today. And yes, I believe it's probably a good omen for trade negotiations between, or tariff negotiations between the United States and the Europeans, that they start on this right foot, certainly from the point of view of Trump, who can tell, with the weapons deal, can tell the American public that weapons manufacturers in the United States are going to win, and the United States no longer has to pay for a war effort that Trump does not see as directly affecting the United States, and does not being directly in the national interest of the United States. So in many ways, this is a good omen, but I don't think we can read too much into it, because the tariff negotiations still need to be agreed upon by President Trump. President Trump, the White House, as far as I know, has not yet confirmed this report about the 15% and whether or not the president would agree to it. Of course, that could be part of the negotiating strategy that the White House is pursuing with the Europeans. But it's also very clear that the Europeans have decided to place pressure, unlike what happened a couple of weeks ago when the 30% tariff was announced by the White House, and the Europeans did not immediately, they basically restrained themselves from the hard talk in public that says, if you impose 30% tariffs, we will also impose 30% tariffs, retaliatory tariffs. But this week, we already see the return of that talk. That is, from the Europeans, the message that we're receiving is that if Donald Trump is not going to accept this proposed 15% tariff as a baseline tariff for most trade between the two countries, then the European Union has prepared a list that builds upon a previous list that was announced months ago when President Trump offered different numbers for the tariffs. There was at a certain point the threat of a 50% tariff, if people remember. So the threat of a 30% tariff was highly interpreted, or mostly interpreted, as a negotiation strategy by the president. Everyone expects it to come lower. Whether 15% will be enough to satisfy the president, only the president knows. So we need to hear confirmation from the White House that this is an acceptable deal, and the Europeans clearly are positioning themselves to retaliate if necessary.
Well, if a deal isn't reached, Europeans are, as you've explained, prepared a retaliatory package. If that comes into effect, would you expect another example of tit-for-tat escalations that we had the opportunity to see between Washington and Beijing?
I would not be surprised if we had a similar situation happen if there's a breakdown in communication between the White House and Brussels. The Europeans obviously want to avoid that, but I would say that the Trump administration also has great incentives to avoid that because that was not a favorable situation for either one of the parties. It wasn't favorable for China, and it certainly wasn't favorable for the United States. And at the end of the day, President Trump ended up having to cede on multiple threats that he made to China in order to help cool down the rising tensions between the two countries and come to a more acceptable, let's say it, tariff negotiation stage. So with the Europeans are clearly going to try to avoid this type of situation. This is a situation that would not benefit either of the parts. So neither one seems particularly interested at this point in bringing that sort of debate into the public arena and having and scaring the markets, quite frankly, once again, with the possibility of a major escalation. So if lessons are learned, Donald Trump is definitely going to avoid that right now, also because he's dealing with a number of other public issues and tensions within his administration, within the United States itself, that have certainly distracted him from the tariff negotiations. And it may not benefit him to throw more gasoline into the fire at this particular moment by destabilizing this relationship with the European Union when he can actually claim to have won if the Europeans come to an agreement that is a higher baseline tariff than, for instance, what the United Kingdom agreed to. Because the United Kingdom, if we recall, in its own deal agreed to a 10% tariff base. At this point, the Europeans would actually be paying more than that, the 15% base, with some exceptions to protect some of the key industries on both sides.
Well, ever since Donald Trump returned to the White House, we've seen numerous back and forths with tariffs, pauses, and delays, and a few trade deals. So far, how much would you say that his, quote, Liberation Day tariffs have gone according to his plan?
Well, it's hard to answer that question in some ways because President Trump often changes the goalposts as the situations develop. So the president certainly indicated earlier in his administration that he expected these negotiations to happen faster than they have. However, he certainly, with the key trade partners, with the Europeans and with China, he has tried to move a little faster, but he certainly has not met the tons of deals, the tens of deals that he promised the American people. He hasn't been able to negotiate them. And in fact, his first stance that the United States would negotiate with each one of the countries around the world one by one, the president himself has acknowledged quite publicly that would not be feasible, that the White House cannot actually engage in those types of negotiations with every single country. It doesn't have the capacity, even in terms of people, to be doing that at the speed that the White House would like to see accomplished. So the president seems to have recalibrated his own expectations and does the expectations of his electorate as well about how many of those deals will actually be accomplished. However, there are certain countries, obviously, with whom the United States is clearly positioning itself for a battle. Brazil, for instance, comes to mind with the letter that the president of the United States sent to President Lula of Brazil went far beyond the disagreement about tariffs into potentially even intervening in the domestic politics of Brazil and the situation with former President Bolsonaro. So President Trump is picking his fights and is choosing his trade agreements more carefully, I would say, and certainly paying attention to the bigger players and trying to focus his attention on those candidates. And the rest of the world seems to, at least for now, seems to have to agree to a base tariff lines, tariff base that he has basically applied a few months ago.
Well, we have a week more to go to see if there are any more deals done. Daniela, thank you so much for joining us and providing us with your insight.
Have a good night.
The third round of direct Russia-Ukraine peace talks held in Istanbul on Wednesday did not bring a breakthrough on a ceasefire. The delegations have, however, agreed on new prisoner swaps.
At renewed peace talks on Wednesday in Istanbul, Russia and Ukraine agreed on a significant prisoner swap, but made no progress toward a ceasefire. It's despite the opening words from Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan urging both sides to prioritize a ceasefire and end what he called a bloody war. Delegations led by Russia's Vladimir Medinsky and Ukraine's Rustem Umerov met for the third time at Istanbul's historic Syrian Palace. They agreed to exchange 1,200 prisoners of war from each side. Russia also confirmed its readiness to return the bodies of 3,000 more fallen Ukrainian soldiers. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says more than 1,000 Ukrainian POWs were brought home Wednesday. Many of them were seriously wounded, and some were held for more than 3 years. He stressed the importance of ongoing exchanges and reiterated Ukraine's call for peace. Russia also received a group of prisoners of war from Ukraine in Belarus. The Russian Defense Ministry published a video on Wednesday showing soldiers cheering as they boarded buses headed for home. In the latest talks, Ukraine proposed a leaders' summit to finish the war by the end of summer.
The priority number one is to organize a meeting of the leaders of presidents, where participation of President Trump and Erdogan will be most valuable. A real ceasefire and end to all strikes on civilian infrastructure. These can be a crucial first steps towards lasting peace. We proposed to the Russian side to hold such a meeting of leaders until the end of August.
However, Russia's Medinsky denied this offer by saying a Putin-Zelensky meeting would only be considered to formalize outcomes, not to hold talks.
For this meeting to happen, we need to work out the deal conditions first and to understand what will be actually discussed at this meeting. Actually, this meeting is not for discussing a deal, but for wrapping it up, signing the final agreement. As the saying goes, the end crowns the work. There is no point in the meeting to discuss all of this all over again.
Despite the return of soldiers, both sides admitted no substantial breakthrough was achieved on a ceasefire. The 40-minute meeting was shorter than previous sessions in May and June, which also centered on prisoner swaps. The talks came days after US President Trump warned of tough sanctions on Russia and its trade partners unless a peace deal is struck within 50 days.
Just hours ahead of the Istanbul talks, Ukraine and Russia exchanged drone strikes. The attacks caused casualties and damage in southern Russia and Ukraine's Odessa region.
Russian strikes on Odessa ignited fires in residential buildings and key infrastructure, while Ukrainian drones targeted Russia's Black Sea region, killing one person, injuring another near Sochi, and hitting an oil depot, according to local authorities. Overnight attacks by Russia damaged seaports, transport links, and even struck the city's historic center, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and 4 people were injured in the attack, authorities said.
I came to clean up shattered glass after I'd cleaned up near my house. Rubble was falling from the roof, so I put on a bicycle helmet to protect my head.
Russia also dropped 2 aerial bombs on the city of Kharkiv, injuring dozens, according to the regional military administration. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky condemned Russia's overnight assault, saying Moscow responded to peace proposals with more violence. Yesterday, at the meeting in Istanbul, the proposal for an immediate and full ceasefire was reiterated to the Russian side. In response, Russian drones struck residential buildings and the Prevoz market in Odessa, apartment blocks in Cherkasy, energy infrastructure in the Kharkiv region, a university gym in Zaporizhzhia, Zelensky said in a statement on X. He said Russia launched 103 drones and 4 missiles during its overnight attack. Meanwhile, Russia's aviation authority confirmed that operations at Sochi airport were suspended for about 4 hours after a Ukrainian drone strike.
All 48 people on board a Russian passenger plane have died after it crashed near Tinda in the Amur region, officials confirmed. The Angara Airlines flight from Blagoveshchensk to Tinda lost contact during approach. The plane was later found burning on a mountainside some 15 kilometers from the town. Ground teams had to navigate rough mountainous terrain to reach the crash site. A 3-day mourning was declared following the crash. Tehran warned that nuclear talks with Britain, Germany, and France set for Friday in Istanbul will not yield a result if the Europeans coordinate their Iran policy with the United States beforehand. Our Turaj Shiralilu has more in Tehran.
Deputy Foreign Minister Garibabadi said in New York, the upcoming negotiations with the European powers, France, Germany, and UK in Turkey, will remain inconclusive in the event that the European side keeps coordinating its policy on Tehran's nuclear program with the United States. Speaking to reporters at the UN headquarters, following his 3 days of negotiations at the world body, he said, if the European Troika demands a snapback of nuclear sanctions, Iran is determined to react. He said, we will be obliged to react. A section of Iran's response has been decided in advance. The E3 has threatened to call for fast return of UN sanctions in October if it does not reach a deal with Iran by end of August. The UN sanctions were terminated in 2015 by Resolution 2231, endorsing the JCPOA nuclear agreement reached the same year in Vienna between Iran on one side and the E3 plus China, Russia, and US on the other. Garibabadi did not rule out Tehran's quitting the Non-Proliferation Treaty in case the sanctions are reimposed, and added, Iran has not decided to stay or withdraw from NPT, but it is on the table. He also said Iran has agreed with a visit by experts of the International Atomic Energy Agency in the next 2-3 weeks to discuss the future cooperation under new conditions. Tehran has suspended its ties with the UN nuclear watchdog in reaction to the agency's failing to condemn US-Israeli attacks on Iran's nuclear sites, which are under the IAEA safeguards. The Iranian Deputy Foreign Minister added, the IAEA team will not visit any nuclear sites, especially the 3 nuclear facilities bombed by the US during the 12-day war. Turaj Shiralilu, reporting for AnewZ TV, Tehran.
UN Security Council's Wednesday session saw tensions escalate over the war and the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. While Israel announced new restrictions against UN humanitarian staff, the UN official briefing the Council called for an immediate ceasefire.
The situation inside Gaza, especially for women and children, is more dire than at any other time during this crisis. That's according to Khaled Kiari, the Assistant Secretary General for the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific. He made the comment when he briefed the Security Council on the situation in the Strip on Wednesday. Kiari said that United Nations Relief and Works Agency operations face severe financial shortages.
While talks are ongoing, the horrific situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate, with Israeli military operations and hostilities expanding throughout the Strip and the human toll mounting by the hour. This nightmare of historic proportions must end immediately.
Meanwhile, Palestinian Ambassador Riyad Mansour accused Israel of devastating Gaza's infrastructure and warned of the toll on civilians.
Israel has ravaged Gaza. It has destroyed nearly everything in that narrow strip of Palestinian land. But nearly 2 million human beings remain, including 1 million children. They must be saved.
However, Israeli Ambassador Danny Danon rejected these accusations of war crimes. He announced measures concerning the staff of the UN Humanitarian Affairs Office.
Today, I announce that Israel will take steps to ensure that what has been happening with OCHA will no longer continue. Hundreds of OCHA employees are undergoing security vetting. Key employees will not have their permits renewed following clear evidence of strong affiliation with Hamas. Some were even involved in the atrocities of October 7. Israel will no longer grant automatic visas to OCHA's international staff. Visas will now be limited to 1 month's terms. What was will no longer be.
Diplomats hope that the upcoming ministerial meeting, co-hosted by France and Saudi Arabia, will renew momentum for a two-state solution. The Security Council emphasized the need for immediate humanitarian access to Gaza and a return to political dialogue.
Clashes between Thai and Cambodian troops at their disputed border have killed at least 12 people, according to Thai officials. Cambodia has yet to confirm whether it suffered any casualties. The fighting marks an escalation of a dispute between the two Southeast Asian neighbors that dates back more than a century. Both sides exchanged gunfire early on Thursday, with each claiming the other had triggered the conflict. Thailand accused Cambodia of firing rockets and carried out airstrikes on Cambodian targets. Both countries have told their citizens near the border to leave, with Thailand evacuating 40,000 civilians. As day 3 of the IDEF 2025 comes to a close, the Defense Fair exhibition continues to make headlines with its major defense showcases and international cooperation deals. Our Nuray Mustafa brings more from the Istanbul venue.
IDEF 2025, the 17th International Defense Industry Fair, recognized as one of the most prestigious events in the global defense sector, has entered its third day in Istanbul, Turkey. The exhibition brings together leading companies in the defense and security industries, government decision makers, and international delegations. This year, the fair hosts representatives from more than 55 countries, over the 850 companies, and numerous government institutions. Organizers view these figures as a reflection of Turkey's growing global role in the defense industry and the rising international prestige of the IDF platform. Within the scope of IDEF 2025, cutting-edge technologies such as unmanned combat systems, indigenously produced armed vehicles, smart weapon platforms, cybersecurity solutions, and AI-based surveillance systems are being showcased. In addition to product displays, a number of bilateral and multilateral meetings, strategic cooperation discussions, and industrial briefings have taken place. Turkey's major defense companies, particularly Baykar, Aselsan, and Roketsan, are presenting their latest projects at this year's event. Notably, a new agreement has also been signed between Roketsan and Turksat, marking a significant step in space and satellite technology cooperation. In an exclusive interview with AnewZ, Roketsan General Manager Murat İkinci provided detailed insights into key projects, underlining their regional, technological, and strategic importance.
Especially in the fields of ballistic missile technologies and air defense technologies, we announced new projects. These projects are actually very important technologies in today's warfare environment, both to ensure national security and to neutralize countermeasures. Roketsan, with its products in this area, contributes both to friendly and brotherly countries and to the defense of our own country.
So what is the significance of IDEF in terms of international relations? What are Roketsan's plans and goals?
Actually, in the field of international relations, we signed many projects here. In particular, we made agreements called strategic partnerships with many countries that act together with Turkey around the world. In this context, IDEF is a platform for us, a platform where international collaborations are realized. Hopefully, with the contribution of this platform, we will continue to support developments in the global defense industry and engage in joint collaborations together.
Despite being only the third day, the exhibition was drawn substantial attention from both local and international stakeholders. A number of new documents and cooperation agreements have been signed between various countries and companies. Reporting from Istanbul, Nuray Mustafa, Zohrab Shirinov for AnewZ.
At the defense exhibition in Istanbul, Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan gave an exclusive interview to our Nuray Mustafa. Fidan spoke on Azerbaijan's strides in defense technology, regional cooperation, and the possible opening of the Zangezur corridor.
I would like to send my warm greetings to our brothers in Azerbaijan. I also visited the Azerbaijan stand here. Due to my previous job, I was already familiar with Azerbaijan's defense industry products. But over the years, I've seen that Azerbaijan has really advanced itself. It now produces very modern and highly advanced weapon systems and defense industry systems. And there is also a very strong cooperation with the Turkish defense industry. I congratulate Azerbaijan and all our Azerbaijani brothers on their achievements, wishing them continued success.
What are your expectations if relations with Armenia improve and the Zangezur corridor is eventually opened?
As you know, President Aliyev and his counterparts are working intensively on this issue. We are also in close cooperation and consultation. Hopefully, we will see progress here soon, together. Thank you very much.
Turkey is launching work on the Kars-İğdir-Nakçıvan route and remains hopeful about the opening of the Zangezur corridor. Turkish Transport Minister says talks are underway and a direct link to the Turkic world could soon become a reality.
Of course, transport corridors are important for us. You are already carrying out construction work on the Azerbaijani side, both rail and road. We are also starting this year on the Kars-İğdir-Nakçıvan route. The credit agreement is finalized. What remains in between? The Zangezur corridor with Nakçıvan. On that, Azerbaijan and Armenia are holding the necessary negotiations. We too are making efforts to contribute constructively to this process. I believe this issue will be resolved without too much delay and hope we will open a more direct and shorter corridor to the Turkic world.
Amid trade tensions between Kabul and Islamabad, a breakthrough appears to have been reached. Afghanistan's Ministry of Industry and Commerce has announced the signing of a preferential trade agreement with Pakistan. Our Tamim Bahiz has more in Kabul.
The agreement was finalized during a two-day official visit by a high-level Afghan delegation led by Deputy Minister Ahmadullah Zahid. Under the agreement, 4 key Afghan agriculture products, grapes, apples, pomegranates and tomatoes will be exported to Pakistan under preferential tariffs. In return, Pakistan will export bananas, mangoes, potatoes and mandarins to Afghanistan under similar terms. Officials say the aim is to lower cost, streamline customs processes and support farmers and traders on both sides of the border. The ambassador of Afghanistan in Islamabad confirmed that the agreement will be valid for 1 year and can be extended by mutual consent. He also noted that more products could be included in future phases of the deal. In addition to the tariff deal, several other key outcomes were announced. The Angu-Ada border crossing is scheduled to reopen by end of August 2025. Technical talks have begun on reviving the Afghanistan-Pakistan transit trade agreement, and both countries have agreed to hold joint trade exhibitions. The two sides also discussed ways to expand Afghan coal export, promote the carpet industry, and improve logistics for Afghan goods passing through Karachi port. This visit is being seen as a significant step toward rebuilding regional trade ties and advancing Afghanistan's broader economic development agenda, despite ongoing political tensions. This is Tamim Bahiz in Kabul for AnewZ.
Syria and Saudi Arabia signed agreements worth more than $6 billion at their first joint investment forum in Damascus. The deals span sectors including energy, industry, construction, and cybersecurity, and are expected to create 50,000 jobs across all 14 Syrian provinces. Syria's interim president Ahmed al-Shara hosted a 130-member Saudi delegation led by Investment Minister Khalid al-Fali. Starting August 1st, Azerbaijani gas will flow to Syria through the Kilis pipeline via Turkey. The first phase will see the delivery of 1.2 billion cubic meters of gas annually to power plants in Aleppo and Homs, generating about 1,200 megawatts of electricity. This comes following the signing of a memorandum of understanding earlier this month during Syria's interim president's visit to Baku. New Syrian authorities are stepping up efforts to rebuild and revitalize the economy of the war-torn country by seeking out investments and boosting regional cooperation. As Azerbaijani gas is set to start flowing to the country in August, Saudi Arabia has pledged more than $6 billion of private and public sector investments in Syria. On these latest developments, we're talking with Ahmed Ghosn, a strategic studies researcher coming to us from Beirut. Welcome, thank you for being with us. Let's start with the energy sector. How much would you say that introducing Azerbaijani gas via Turkey to Syria can help the country revive its industries and get back on the track of development?
Yes, thank you for having me. But it will be very good. It will be such a deal for Syria. But first of all, the deal between Syria and Azerbaijan strengthens Turkey's goal of becoming a regional energy center. Also, this is a part of the biggest Turkish vision mentioned in Ahmed Davutoğlu's book called Strategic Depths, Turkey role in the international arena. This is related to a Turkish face that the 21st century is a Turkish era. But for Syria, this will be certainly a positive step for both Azerbaijan and Syria. Azerbaijan will make profit from selling their natural gas, and Syria will receive around 1-2 billion cubic meters of natural gas annually. This is an expected number from Turkish journals. But the gas will pass through Kilis. It's a Turkish area from the border, and reach power plants in Aleppo and Homs, helping to generate electricity on top 1,200 to 1,300 megawatts in production capacity. This could build a foundation for investment and employment, but infrastructure and investment need security. These pipelines require protection, especially given the indispensable conflict between the Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, and the de facto authority in Syria. At the same time, massacres have continued since the regime's collapse, targeting Druze and even Christian communities through bombing, slaughtering, and burning areas. This will affect the reputation, therefore the economy. Syria's true capital today is safety and security. But sadly, the state doesn't seem to take this seriously. On the contrary, this is arguably supporting terrorism by providing weapons, official military uniform to these people who are burning the Syrian reputation. But reduce the economic part of it is reducing transportation cost and increasing profit margin by turning the risk of high shipping cost through the Strait of Hormuz into an opportunity for gain. The best fact about Syria's Azerbaijan gas deal. So this is the economic side and the political side.
Well, following the lifting of U.S. sanctions on Damascus, we've seen some investments pouring in. Now Riyadh pledging billions. Do you expect more countries to follow the Saudis?
Honestly, this depends on the Syria de facto government and the safety that will keep and that will be handling in Syria. But financially, Saudi Arabia announced like $6.4 billion of investment in Syria, seeking to rebuild Syria after 14 years of war. But they said that they will be working on 47 agreements and the memoranda of understanding that will be worth $6.4 billion, and telecommunication and real estate and cybersecurity also. But politically, uh, they announced something very good called the Saudi Syria Business Council that will be established under the directive of MBS, the prince. But the universe abhors vacuum, and that's also applied to politics, because after the fall of the previous regime in Syria and the decline of Iran's influence, two regional power remained in the MENA region, or in the Levant, Turkey and Israel. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is effectively seeking a regional role, and frankly, it has all means to fill that vacuum. Its position, it is on the Indian Middle Eastern corridor map. It's also a part of BRICS. It has a strong oil-based economy, and today we see it buying shares in this new Syria project. I believe a significant portion of Saudi will go towards paying public sector salaries and operating state institutions, because Saudi Arabia believes in institutions. They will not going to invest in a vacuum like Syria, where chaos is everywhere. It does not invest in chaos. They have a vision, and they should have a regional role in the Middle East, as Iran was a regional power, should have been starting from Syria, and that's what Saudi Arabia is doing now. But the Saudi Arabia role in Syria is crucial, because it helped delay a direct confrontation between Israel and Turkey on the Syrian land.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and providing us with your insights and opinions.
Thank you for your time.
In other news, Uzbekistan's energy ministry, Azerbaijan's Sokar, and Uzbek Neftegaz have signed a production sharing agreement for hydrocarbon exploration and production in the Ustyurt region. Under the deal, 3D seismic surveys will be carried out over an area of at least 1,000 square kilometers, followed by exploratory drilling of one well. If commercial reserves are found, the project will move into development and production. Concerns over a potential disruption of Kazakh oil exports through the Black Sea have emerged due to new Russian port regulations and Western sanctions. Kazakhstan's energy ministry, however, says shipments are continuing as usual. Our Fariza Kalimurzina has more.
Kazakhstan's Ministry of Energy has denied reports that Russia has halted the shipment of Kazakh oil through its Black Sea ports due to restrictions on foreign tankers. In an official statement to AnewZ, the ministry confirmed that oil exports through Russian seaports are continuing as normal. However, officials clarified that Kaztrans-Oil, the national company overseeing oil exports, is currently addressing the situation at the port of Ust-Luga, where additional security measures are being introduced to protect critical transport infrastructure. Earlier, Reuters reported that foreign oil tankers had been temporarily barred from loading at key Russian Black Sea ports under new regulatory rules. The report suggested this could effectively block Kazakh oil exports, which largely rely on a consortium involving Western energy firms. According to Reuters, the restrictions also affecting Russian oil shipments from the port of Novorossiysk could lead to a drop in global oil supply by more than 2%. These developments come amid the European Union's latest round of sanctions against Russia. Earlier this week, President Vladimir Putin signed a law requiring foreign vessels to obtain clearance from Russia's Federal Security Service before entering the country's ports. The law was signed just days after the European Union adopted its 18th package of sanctions targeting tankers carrying Russian oil and lowering the oil price cap from $60 to $47.60 per barrel. So far, neither the Caspian Pipeline Consortium nor Russia's Ministry of Transport has commented on the reported suspension. Meanwhile, Kazakhstan exports more than 80% of its oil via the CPC pipeline, which terminates at the Russian port of Yuzhnaya Ozerovka. In recent years, oil flows through this route have been interrupted multiple times. In response, Kazakh authorities have emphasized the need to diversify export routes, identifying the Trans-Caspian corridor as a key alternative. Still, despite geopolitical challenges, the Caspian pipeline remains the country's primary oil export channel. Farisa Kalimurzana, AnewZ, Almaty, Kazakhstan.
Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan met his Russian counterpart Mikhail Mishustin in Russia's Altai Republic during an international conference on environmental protection. The two prime ministers talked on the current state of Armenian-Russian relations, bilateral cooperation, partnership within the Eurasian Economic Union, and South Caucasus agenda. Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has sent a letter of condolence to Russia's President Vladimir Putin following the deadly plane crash in Russia's Far East. Aliyev said he was deeply saddened by the loss of life and extended sympathy to the victims' families on behalf of the Azerbaijani people. According to the emergency service reports, all people aboard the flight that crashed in Russia's Amur region are believed to have died. Iran is facing extreme heat and a worsening water crisis, with President Masoud Pezeshkian warning that Tehran may no longer be able to function as the capital. Extreme heat and electricity shortages have prompted the government to order a public shutdown in 8 provinces, closing public offices and banks. Most businesses have come to a standstill, and officials warn that if the crisis deepens, millions may be forced to relocate. Turkey is once again battling intense wildfires, with several provinces facing fast-moving flames and tragic losses. The fire has already forced evacuations and claimed lives.
Wildfires raged for a 4th straight day in northwestern Turkey as residents and emergency crews faced what locals described as the most devastating fire in the region's recent memory. In Bilecik's Osmaneli district, flames swept toward the village of Selçuk, forcing evacuations as fire surrounded homes from multiple directions. Residents say the fire spread rapidly, fueled by strong winds and blistering heat. Though Selçuk was spared major damage, others were not as fortunate.
I can say this, it's the biggest fire in Osmaneli history. Osmaneli has never seen a fire like this in its history. It surrounded our village from 3 sides. They couldn't intervene. There are no roads, thick forest, rocky areas. Helicopters don't work at night. Because they don't work, they couldn't intervene. The fire spread very quickly, also due to the wind. Thank God there wasn't much damage in our village.
Across Turkey, at least 6 major wildfires are burning. In the central province of Eskişehir, 10 firefighters lost their lives and 14 more were injured after the fire intensified and jumped into neighbouring Afyonkarahisar. Towns and villages there were also evacuated as conditions worsened. This summer has seen hundreds of wildfires erupt across the country. While Turkey is no stranger to hot summers, locals and officials alike warn that the fires are becoming deadlier and more destructive every year.
Well, that's all we have for you for now. Thank you so much for watching and stay tuned to AnewZ.